It was a bright, searing spring morning in 1846 Johnson Square. In the heart of Savannah, Georgia, usually a place of quiet, was unusually crowded that day. Under the shadows of white stone buildings, people had gathered, some with solemn faces, others with curiosity, but all for the same purpose, the auction. The air was thick with the mingled scents of sweat, horses, and tobacco. Women sat beneath their delicate parasols, clutching lace handkerchiefs, as though shielding themselves not from the sun, but from the mass of humanity around them. Men stood with coat buttons undone, holding small wooden paddles, ready to raise them when the bidding began. At one edge of the crowd stood Elizabeth Mount, a woman still wrapped in the shadow of mourning. Just 6 months earlier, she had been widowed. Her husband, Colonel Thomas Mount, once one of the region's wealthiest and harshest planters, had died suddenly, leaving behind only a collapsing estate, stacks of debts, and untended tobacco fields. This was the first time Elizabeth had stepped out of her house since his death, not for a social visit, nor for a church service, but out of necessity. Mount Plantation, 7 miles from Savannah, was on the brink of ruin. The fields lay barren, the workers were few, and the money was running out. She stood there with gloved hands, holding a small leather notebook. Inside were neat columns of figures, acres, wages, expenses, and the thin line of remaining funds. Every decision today had to be precise. The auction began, one by one. Men were brought out, not introduced, but displayed, as if they were livestock or machinery. Buyers inspected their teeth, measured their arms, slapped their shoulders to test for strength. Elizabeth watched silently, her face calm, eyes steady, her mind busy with arithmetic rather than emotion. Then the auctioneer's voice changed. Next, lot number 17. The noise subsided. A man was led forward and bound in chains, yet standing tall. His shoulders were broad, his body powerful, and his skin so dark it seemed to swallow the light, like something carved from the night itself. Across his chest ran thin, deliberate scars, not the random marks of whips, but symbols, carved with intent. But it was his eyes that held the crowd still, bright amber, alive with a light that did not belong to the human world. He did not lower his gaze. He looked directly at the onlookers, not with fear, nor defiance, but with a calm that felt ancient, as though he already knew where he was and yet was elsewhere. The auctioneer cleared his throat. This here is Isaiah, 30 years of age, strong build, good teeth, no ailments, trained in tobacco work. Previous owner deceased, property now being sold by the state. Yet no one moved. For a moment, it seemed as if something unspoken passed through the crowd. A chill. A whisper of warning. Opening bid, $500. Silence. 400. Still silence. A bead of sweat rolled down the auctioneer's temple. 200. Then a clear voice cut through the heat. 200, said Elizabeth Mount. All eyes turned to her. 200 from Mrs. Mount. The auctioneer cried. Any higher bids? None came. Once, twice, sold. Isaiah was motioned forward. He looked at Elizabeth for the briefest moment, those amber eyes gleaming. And in them she saw something that was not submission, not gratitude, but knowing, as if he understood more than anyone there, including her. As Elizabeth signed the papers, a woman stepped up beside her. It was Margaret Harrington, the banker's wife, known for her polite chatter and subtle gossip. Leaning close, she whispered, "Lizzie, you should know. That man's been sold 3 times in 2 years, and every master of his met a bad end." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Margaret, I don't buy stories. I buy labor. And at 200, he's a bargain." She didn't yet know this would be the most ruinous bargain of her life. Later that afternoon, as Elizabeth rode home in her carriage, Isaiah stood at the back of the wagon. The dirt road stretched endlessly ahead, dust swirling around them. After 7 miles, the vast decay of Mount Plantation began to emerge. Once grand columns, now chipped and faded. Gardens overrun, verandas webbed with spiders. Without looking back, Elizabeth spoke, her tone firm and businesslike. "My husband died in November. The overseer fled afterward, taking 3 hands with him. The rest are old or ill. You have experience in tobacco fields? Isaiah bowed his head slightly. Yes, ma'am. Good, you'll serve as field overseer. 4 workers under you. You report to me, no one else. You'll live in the north cabin, the one the previous overseer used. Work begins before sunrise. Her words were precise, as though she were dictating a contract. When the carriage stopped, an old servant came forward, Malachi, who had served the mounts for decades. Elizabeth pointed toward him. Malachi will show you your quarters. I'll meet you at the fields at 7. Isaiah nodded quietly. That night, as darkness settled, low voices murmured in the kitchen. Malachi spoke to the cook, Bessie, his tone uneasy. That man, there's something wrong about him. Those marks on his chest, they ain't from no whip. They're old country marks. My granny used to say folks like that walk with 1 foot in this world and 1 in another. Bessie kneaded the dough, muttering, Hush now, Malachi. Miss Elizabeth's had enough grief. Don't go filling her house with ghost tales. Malachi shook his head. You don't understand, Bessie. He's been sold 3 times. First master found dead. Eyes open but seeing nothing. Second one walked into the river one night, clothes on, no struggle. Third shot himself, no reason, no note. Just silence. Bessie's hands trembled. Lord have mercy, outside. The moon hung full and pale. Isaiah sat by the door of his cabin, rubbing his wrists where the chains had been. He looked utterly calm. Then he lifted his face toward the sky and whispered a name no one had ever heard before. Inside the big house, Elizabeth wrote in her diary, Purchased a new worker today. Name Isaiah. About 30, of unusual complexion but physically strong. Price unusually low. Perhaps something's wrong. Mrs. Harrington warned me of his past owners. But I'm not superstitious. We'll see tomorrow if this investment proves worthwhile. As she set down her pen, she felt, for just a moment, as though someone was watching her from the window. She turned, but saw only moonlight still in white. Near midnight, Malachi's 12-year-old daughter, Sarah, peeked through the window. Out in the fields, Isaiah was standing under the moon, his chest glowing faintly. The marks on his skin lit from within. His lips moved soundlessly. Yet the air seemed to vibrate, a low pulse that Sarah felt rather than heard. Terrified, she squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them again, the man was gone, and the fields were silent once more. The sun was rising over the horizon. A soft mist lay over the Mount Plantation fields, turning everything gold as light spilled across the tobacco rows. Dew clung to the leaves like tiny reborn stars. Yet beneath that shimmer there was a strange stillness, as though the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen today. Isaiah was the first to awaken. He stepped out of his cabin, the same one the previous overseer had lived in. On the wall hung his tools, a whip, an iron rod, and a small cross-shaped charm. Isaiah looked at them one by one, then quietly buried them in the earth outside, as if laying old terror to rest beneath the soil. When the rest of the laborers arrived, they stared in confusion. Usually, an overseer would shout orders, crack the whip, and demand obedience. But Isaiah simply said, First look at the field, then listen to the earth. She tells you what she needs. The men exchanged uncertain glances. There was both fear and curiosity in their eyes. Isaiah didn't line them up like soldiers. Instead, he assigned work by instinct. The strong-armed men to the oxen, the gentle-handed to planting. He knelt down himself, scooping a handful of soil and rubbing it between his fingers. This land is tired, he murmured. The tobacco has drained her blood. She needs to rest, to taste something different for a while. His words passed over the workers' heads, too strange to understand, but there was something in his tone. Quiet, certain, that made no one dare question him. At 7 o'clock that morning, Elizabeth stood by her window, in knee. Her hand was the same leather notebook that had held yesterday's auction numbers. She looked down toward the fields. Everything appeared different. The workers moved in calm rhythm. There was no shouting, no chaos, and Isaiah's movements carried a quiet authority, as though he could hear the very heartbeat of the earth. For the first time, Elizabeth saw him not merely as a man, but as something other, a being somehow attuned to nature itself. That evening, she summoned him to her study. It was once Colonel Mount's office, where hunting trophies had once hung. She had replaced them with botanical drawings, seeds, plants, soil samples. Isaiah entered silently, head bowed, calm as always. "The tobacco fields are dying," Elizabeth said. "Yes," Isaiah replied. "Because they have eaten the same thing for too long. The earth is like a body. Feed it the same food every day and it grows sick." Elizabeth blinked in surprise. "Who taught you that?" Isaiah paused before answering. "My father. He read the land. We listened to it, the way others listen to prayer." Elizabeth opened her notebook. "What you said is scientifically sound. After tobacco, legumes restore nitrogen to the soil. But how do you know this?" Isaiah smiled faintly. "Some knowledge doesn't come from books. It comes from blood." Those words lingered in Elizabeth's heart long after he left. That night she wrote in her diary, "Isaiah's understanding is extraordinary. His words carry both reason and mystery. I must not underestimate him. If guided properly, he could save these fields." Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet order settled over Mount Plantation. Isaiah had small pits dug along the field edges, filling them with soil, herbs, and things no one recognized. Within days, the crops began to change, greener, fuller, almost breathing again. Elizabeth saw it with her own eyes. Where brittle stalks had once stood, there was life. Every morning she stood on the veranda watching him work, his steady hands, his deliberate movements, and those same amber eyes, bright as though speaking to the ground itself. But inside the house, unease began to grow. In the kitchen, the servants whispered. Bessie, the cook, made the sign of the cross whenever Isaiah's name was spoken. "That man ain't right," she would mutter. "When he passes, keep your eyes down." Malachi said nothing, but every night he placed salt and bits of iron under his daughter Sarah's bed, an old African charm for protection. One evening, as the sun sank beyond the fields, Elizabeth approached Isaiah. "I've sent new seed for planting. You may start next week." He shook his head. "Not yet. The land hasn't finished breathing." Elizabeth studied him. "You speak of the earth as if she's alive." "She is alive," Isaiah said simply. "Most people have just forgotten her language." Elizabeth fell silent. There was truth in his words, unsettling but undeniable. She felt as if this man could read not only the land, but her. That night she couldn't sleep. In her dream, she stood among the tobacco rows. The plants swayed gently, their leaves brushing her skin, tracing symbols on her arms, in a language she didn't understand, yet somehow knew was sacred. Days turned into weeks. The fields flourished. The workers grew less weary, but a quiet fear took root among them. Sometimes Isaiah disappeared into the fields at night, returning only by dawn. Strange scents drifted from his cabin, herbs, smoke, and something that smelled like memory. When Malachi once asked what he was doing, Isaiah replied softly, "I remind the earth of who she is." By early August, Elizabeth made a decision no Southern woman of her class would have dared. She dismissed the house overseer, old Malachi, and placed Isaiah in charge of both field and household. In her diary, she wrote, "In business, tradition must sometimes be sacrificed. Discipline requires a single hand of command." The announcement struck the house like a storm. Bessie snuffed out the fire and whispered, "She's calling her own end." That night, 2 young slaves fled into the woods. By morning, only broken door frames remained, and on the edge of the fields, strange footprints in circular patterns, as if some ritual had been performed. Now Isaiah was master of the day and shadow of the night. Elizabeth began speaking with him more often, first in open rooms, then behind closed doors. She asked about herbs, energy, and the old rituals he hinted at. Isaiah never gave direct answers. "Everything has power," he said. "Tobacco isn't just a plant, it remembers. Call it correctly, and it will answer." Elizabeth was fascinated. She forgot her husband's rules and began to believe in Isaiah's unseen world. She, too, became a servant of the soil. That night she wrote, "I asked Isaiah about the markings on his chest. He said they are words of memory and command. I copied one onto my wrist today. When I did, A strange peace filled me, as if some long-locked door had opened. But Mount Plantation was no longer what it had been. At night, strange sounds echoed through the house, a rhythmic thudding beneath the ground like a buried heart beating. Sometimes, faint lights shimmered across the fields, blue and gold, as if the moon itself had descended into the soil. Bessie warned young Sarah, "When you see that light, don't go outside. It sees you and it wants an answer." Once, Sarah did look. Through her window she saw Isaiah standing in the fields, Elizabeth beside him. Smoke circled them. Glowing rings marked the ground. Sarah covered her eyes. When she looked again, they were gone, only the tobacco leaves swaying gently, whispering in a language the wind seemed to understand. And so, the new overseer became more than a keeper of the fields. He became the silent master of the house, of the woman who owned it, and perhaps of the land itself. Elizabeth no longer called him Isaiah. She called him simply IB to her. It was no longer a name, it was a secret that was quietly laying the foundation for the darkness yet to come. Night settled strangely over Mount Plantation, thick, damp, and heavy, as though the earth itself had stopped breathing, listening for something above. And during those nights, Elizabeth Mount's dreams began to change. At first, they were only shadows, flashes of light between rows of tobacco, the sound of a woman whispering near a deep well. But soon a pattern began to form. Every dream carried the same scene. She was walking through the tobacco fields, the leaves wrapping around her hands, and from beneath the soil came a voice, soft, rhythmic, and haunting, "My land, my blood, my promise." One night she woke suddenly, drenched in sweat. On the floor beside her bed were scattered bits of soil, a thin, deliberate trail of it, leading straight to her half-open door. She rose quietly and stepped into the corridor. The veranda was silent, but far across the fields she saw smoke curling upward, a faint glow coming from the direction of Isaiah's cabin. The next morning, she confronted him. "Where were you last night?" "I saw a light by your cabin," Isaiah replied softly. "I was speaking to the earth. She was asking questions." Elizabeth frowned. "The earth doesn't ask questions, Isaiah. Tobacco needs sun and water, not rituals." He smiled, a wound-like smile, slow and knowing. "Your husband thought the same, but the earth did not accept him." Her breath caught. "You know nothing about my husband." "I know," he said, "that he punished the soil, and it punished him back. This land remembers." Elizabeth turned away, but the chill in his words clung to her. After that, strange markings began to appear in the fields. At first, the workers thought they were from the oxen, random hoof prints, but soon the marks formed circles, and within them, traces of ash. Fear spread quietly among the hens. Malachi came to Isaiah one morning. "What is this?" "Who's making them?" Isaiah said calmly. "It's how the land breathes. Don't disturb it." When Bessie overheard that, she trembled. That night she went to Elizabeth and whispered, "Miss Lizzie, that man ain't right. There's something in him that ain't of this world." Elizabeth's tone was cold, steady. "This house is mine, Bessie. Whatever happens here happens because I allow it." But deep inside, she was afraid. Every night she felt as though someone entered her room, not to harm her, but to bury something beneath her bed. And every morning, she found small rings of dry soil on the floor. One afternoon, she went to the fields. Isaiah was kneeling in the dirt, both arms bare. For the first time, Elizabeth saw the markings on his skin clearly, not scars, but a script. Each symbol seemed carved by intention, connected like lines on a map on his shoulder. One word stood out, Koru. When she touched it, Isaiah flinched, closing his eyes. "What does it mean?" she asked. "The circle of life," he said softly. "Beginning and end are one. Did you mark yourself?" "No," he replied. "It was placed upon me when I was a child. In my tribe it belonged to the one who could hear the earth." Elizabeth's voice lowered. "And now you wish to teach it to me?" Isaiah looked directly into her eyes. "You're already learning. Your dreams, they are the beginning." That night the dreams grew deeper. She stood in a dark chamber, the ground beneath her pulsing like a heartbeat, and that same voice whispered, "Say my name. Wake me again." When she woke, Beside her bed sat a small clay bowl filled with red soil, 2 tobacco leaves, and a small iron coin. The kind her late husband once paid the workers with. She told no one. But the next morning, she went straight to Isaiah's cabin. "Did you place this by my bed?" "No," he said, his golden eyes unblinking. "The earth sent it. To remind you, this place no longer belongs to you." Elizabeth began to change. Her once immaculate dresses now carried stains of soil. She spent more time in the fields than in her study. Sleep left her eyes, replaced by a feverish brightness, something between revelation and madness. She wrote in her diary, "I spoke to the land today, and I think it answered. Perhaps this is madness. But if madness can speak, then perhaps creation began the same way." Bessie saw her one afternoon sitting with Isaiah inside one of the circles, tracing strange shapes into the dirt with her fingers. Bessie made the sign of the cross and fled. That night, she dreamed that the tobacco leaves were breathing, slow and human, as though the field itself was alive. She woke in terror and prayed for her mistress's soul. Now, every night new circles appeared, larger, more complex by morning. Each had changed, as if a new word had been written in an unknown tongue. Isaiah sprinkled soil over them and murmured softly, "These are words. The earth is telling her story." Elizabeth began calling it a natural experiment. She said Isaiah's work was agricultural spirituality, but deep inside, she knew this was no science, this was covenant, a ritual of exchange. One humid afternoon in September, thunder gathering over the horizon, Isaiah summoned her. "The land is ready," he said. "Today she opens." In the center of the field lay the largest circle yet. "This is where it began," he said. "A seed was buried here, not of tobacco, but of blood. When your husband first whipped the slaves, their blood soaked this soil. It never dried. Since that day, the land has thirsted." Elizabeth's voice trembled. "And what are you going to do?" Isaiah drew a small knife across his palm. "Finish it," he said. "We remind the earth who truly owns it, the one who hears. You're the one who commands." She hesitated, only for a moment. Then she held out her own hand. Their blood mingled and fell into the circle. The ground shivered, exhaling a long, low breath, the sound of something waking after centuries of silence. Thunder rolled across the sky. The tobacco leaves trembled violently, as if bowing to something unseen. A whisper swept through the wind. The promise is kept. That night, every lamp in Mount Plantation went dark at once. Bessie clutched her daughter and whispered, "By morning, nothing will be the same." By the time September came, the air over Mount Plantation had changed. It was heavier now, thick with a strange weight, as though the wind itself carried a secret burden. At night, when the moonlight touched the tobacco fields, the leaves shimmered with an eerie bluish-green hue that no human eye could quite trust. Bessie often whispered, "The leaves are breathing." I've seen them myself, but whenever someone asked what she meant, she simply made the sign of the cross and fell silent. Elizabeth Mount was no longer the woman she once had been. The precise, quiet mistress buried in account books and plantation ledgers. Her hair was loose now, streaked with dust. Her skin bore the color of soil, and in her eyes burned a strange light, a fire that looked neither holy nor sane. She spent her days and nights in the fields, always beside Isaiah. They were no longer mistress and servant, not even woman and man, but something else entirely, bound together by a force neither of them could explain. One evening, Malachi whispered to Bessie, trembling, "I saw them, out there in the field, standing in a circle, chanting. There was salt on the ground and blood. Then the air stopped moving, as if the whole world was listening." Bessie shuddered. "This is the end," she murmured. "No good will come of this place. I'll be gone by morning." But by morning, Bessie hadn't gone anywhere. In the final hours of night, when she stepped from her room, she saw the tobacco leaves moving on their own, and from between them came a low whisper, "Stay." "Not yet." She tried to scream, but no sound came out. When dawn came, she lay in her bed, eyes open, awake but voiceless. Elizabeth looked at her calmly and said only, "The earth decides who stays and who goes." Isaiah stood beside her, silent. His expression was unreadable, but his amber eyes, the same eyes she had seen on the day of the auction, now shone with a light that seemed no longer human. In Elizabeth's diary, an entry from that day read, "Bessie has gone silent. Perhaps she heard what she was not meant to hear. Isaiah says the earth gave her peace, but I know better. It wasn't peace. It was binding. She's part of the land now." Circles of light began appearing along the edges of the fields. Some workers claimed they saw two figures standing within them, pointing toward the sky while blue flames rose behind them. A few days later, those workers disappeared. In their cabins were clay jars streaked with blood. Isaiah said only, "They were returned to the earth. What is taken from here must always be given back." Elizabeth's transformation was no longer subtle. The same markings that covered Isaiah's body were now emerging on her arms, at first faint, like dust beneath her skin, but soon they deepened, as though being carved from within. She would stare at them in the mirror, tracing them with her fingertips and smile a slow, unsettling smile. Her diary read, "Now I begin to understand. These marks don't bring pain and they show the way. The one who sleeps beneath the soil is waking." By mid-September, a storm came, but there was no rain. Instead, the sky turned crimson, and streaks of lightning etched themselves into the trees. All night, the tobacco leaves burned and trembled, yet when dawn arrived, they were untouched, blackened but unbroken. The ground had changed color, dark, shining, and wet, a soil that seemed alive. Elizabeth turned to Isaiah. "It's complete," she said. "Tonight it ends." Isaiah shook his head. "No," he whispered. "Tonight it begins." That night, September 23rd, 1846, would forever be known as the night of Mount Plantation. Every door in the manor was locked, every lamp extinguished. Only the fields glowed, a strange, inner light seeping from the ground itself. Elizabeth wore a white dress, holding a brass bowl in her hands. Beside her stood Isaiah, barefoot, calm, his eyes filled with an inhuman stillness. Around them, a great circle had been drawn, made of salt, blood, and the ashes of burned herbs. Isaiah looked toward the heavens. "Now you'll see," he said softly, "what it means when the earth breathes." He took her hand. A spark leapt between them, electric, silent. The ground shivered. The tobacco leaves rustled all at once, as if touched by an invisible wind. Elizabeth spoke words like a prayer, in a language that no one living knew. Isaiah repeated them, and in his voice, the earth itself seemed to answer. Between them burned the bowl of soil and tobacco leaves, the smoke twisting upward, blue and black carrying the scent of iron, blood, and rain. The smoke thickened until the world seemed to stop. No air, no sound, only stillness. Then from deep below came a slow, thunderous pulse, as if something vast had stirred from centuries of sleep. Malachi, who had watched from afar, later told the story. "I saw their bodies blur, fade into the smoke. There was a shape inside it like a man but taller, and his arms sank into the earth. Then everything went dark, only the smell of soil remained. When morning came, the fields were scorched, the plants blackened, the ground soft, and at the center, a deep crater. Isaiah was gone. Elizabeth was found in the cellar of the house, sitting upright, eyes wide but empty, as if nothing human remained inside her. In her lap lay her diary. On the final page it read, "He is not within me. I am within him. Flesh changes, but essence remains." Months later, when an investigation was made, locals said they still heard voices in the fields at night, sometimes a woman's, sometimes a man's. Some swore they saw a figure walking through the smoke, only to vanish the moment they looked again. Those who bought Mount Plantation tobacco afterward were said to go mad. They dreamed of circles, symbols, and a whisper repeating through the dark, "I came from the soil. I remain in the soil." No one lived to verify what truly happened. In 1850, Mount House burned to the ground. People said, the fire wasn't man's doing. The earth lit it herself. The land was never plowed again. Trees grew back, but their roots twisted strangely, as though something beneath refused to let go. And even now, sometimes at sunset, Travelers claimed to see a long black figure walking the edge of the fields, his clothes torn, his eyes glowing amber. Behind him walks a woman in white, her eyes open but hollow. After that night in September 1846, Mount Plantation seemed to forget how to breathe. The fields, once fragrant with the sweetness of tobacco, now lay drowned in dead silence. The air carried a damp, metallic scent, the unmistakable smell of blood. The soil had turned a deep, glistening black, as though the light had been drained from its very heart. Elizabeth Mount was found alive, but lifeless. She sat on a wooden chair in the cellar, her eyes open, a faint, terrible calm frozen on her face. In her hands rested the same leather-bound diary. Its first page was open, and on it, in her distinct handwriting, were the words, "The earth has spoken. Now it is sacred. Blood has awakened the soil." When the investigation began, the villagers spoke of sounds that had come from beneath the ground that night. Echoes, like murmurs of something vast and ancient. Some said the earth had moved on its own. Others swore that the roots of the trees had risen, twisting like serpents, and a few saw circles of light forming in the fields, appearing and vanishing again and again. But the most terrifying discovery came weeks later. The map of the land had changed. When the surveyors remeasured Mount Plantation, they found the property had expanded, 2 acres larger than before. No river had shifted. No hill had fallen. It was as if the land itself had stretched, as though it were breathing, or making room for something beneath. Dr. Jonathan Merritt from the state hospital wrote in his report, "The soil of this plantation exhibits biological anomalies. Microscopic elements within it resemble hematine, a compound found in blood. It retains moisture unnaturally, even in prolonged drought. I believe this soil is alive, or infused with something once human." The report was later dismissed as unscientific, but in Merritt's private diary, an unpublished note was found. "I camped near the field one night. Around midnight, I felt the ground beneath me pulse, slow, rhythmic, like the beating of a heart. I touched the soil and it was warm. The earth is alive." Isaiah Boone was never found, but the stories about him grew darker with time. Workers claimed they saw a tall shadow walking through the tobacco rows, a figure that sank into the soil when they called out. Some even swore he spoke to them. "The earth calls you," he said. "It's not ours anymore. We belong to it." Bessie, the maid who had survived that night, died 3 days later. Before her final breath, she whispered only one sentence. "He's inside her." Inside the earth. Her eyes remained open after death, and across her pupils appeared faint brown markings, the same that once covered Isaiah's body. Soon, strange growths began to appear in the fields. The new tobacco plants grew at unnatural speed. Their leaves were not green, but dark blue, nearly black. When touched, they seemed to pulse faintly, as though something beneath the surface was breathing. When torn, they released a red fluid, which quickly absorbed into the soil like spilled blood. A local scholar later wrote, "I brought one leaf home, sealed it in a glass jar. By morning, the leaf had vanished, but the inside of the jar was covered in markings, circles and lines resembling ancient sigils." In 1847, when Mount Plantation's tobacco was finally sold, strange things began to happen to those who smoked it. At first came the dreams, visions of dark soil, endless fields, and voices calling from beyond the sea. Then came the whispers, as the smokers began to speak in unknown tongues. Within days, many lost their sense of self. One man told his wife, "I am not your husband, I am Kofi. From Ghana I returned from the soil." 2 days later, he was found dead. His fingers were covered in small, straight markings, the same as those that had appeared on Elizabeth's arms. When laborers tried to dig into the ground to destroy the cursed fields, their shovels bent. The earth resisted, closing itself as if it were a door locked from the inside. In 1850, a fire came. No one saw its flames, but the night sky glowed red until morning. When the townspeople arrived, Mount House was ash, yet the earth below it was wet. as if water had boiled up from beneath the fire. A young girl from a nearby farm said softly, "I saw her, a woman in white. She was smiling. Behind her walked a shadow, then both disappeared into the smoke." The land was abandoned after that. For years, no one dared to approach it. In the 1868 maps, the surveyors marked the area with a single note: unfit for cultivation. The ground does not remain still. But what did that mean? It meant the land changed its surface every few months. Trees uprooting themselves, mounds forming and vanishing overnight. The ground seemed to breathe, as though something beneath it was alive or growing. At the end of the 19th century, a group of scholars returned to study the site. They dug a small pit and found red soil beneath the surface. One of them, Professor Lawrence, wrote in his notes, "This soil is unlike any other. It feels warm and it pulses faintly, as if something beneath were breathing. Perhaps what once was Elizabeth, or Isaiah, perhaps they have become one." 2 weeks later, Lawrence died. The official report called it an unknown fever, but those who saw his body said his skin was marked, thin, sharp lines crossing one another like carvings of a forgotten ritual. Years passed, but the nature of the land did not change. In 1922, the Georgia Historical Society conducted an excavation. They uncovered a clay jar filled with black soil. When opened, a hot vapor escaped, and within days 3 workers fell ill. Strange symbols appeared on their arms. The doctor said, "This isn't a rash, it's rising from within." The jar was resealed and buried again. The project was abandoned. From then on, the place was known only by one name, the sacred ground. But its sanctity was not of prayer, it was of fear. Old men still whisper by the fireside, "Don't disturb that soil. It belongs to another world. It carries the spirit of Isaiah and the woman who could not stop him." On nights when the moon is weak, a mist sometimes rolls across the old fields. Those who look closely claim to see a faint shadow moving through it, a tall figure, and behind him the whisper of a woman's voice. The earth is alive, and it is still hungry. When everything ended, night fell slowly that evening. There were no clouds, yet a strange mist drifted through the moonlight, a mist that brought neither coolness nor peace. The air stood still. The leaves in the tobacco fields did not move, as though time itself had stopped. It was September 23rd, 1846, the final night of Mount Plantation. Elizabeth Mount sat in her room, the leather-bound diary trembling in her hands. Faint smears of blood stained the pages, and her handwriting wavered, as if the pen itself feared the words it was writing. The last entry read, "Isaiah says the earth is waking. I am not afraid. I am waiting." From the cellar came a low, whispering hum. Bessie and Malachi had begged her for days, "Ma'am, that man is the devil." But Elizabeth no longer heard the living. Her eyes burned with a dim amber light, not human, not sane. That night she dressed in white, let her hair fall loose, and whispered as she opened the door, "Isaiah is waiting." Outside, the world looked otherworldly. Under the moon, the tobacco leaves shimmered blue-green. Steam rose from the soil, as though the ground itself were breathing, and in the center of the field stood Isaiah, barefoot, bare-chested, his body covered in those same strange markings that now crawled along Elizabeth's arms. The symbols pulsed faintly in the moonlight, alive, like something beneath the skin was moving. "It's time," Isaiah said, his voice stripped of all humanity. "The earth wants to speak." Elizabeth stepped closer. "I'm ready," she said softly. "Teach me." They drew a circle in the center of the field, made of salt, soil, and blood. In the middle, they placed a brass bowl filled with tobacco leaves, bits of bone, and dark soil taken from deep beneath the plantation. Isaiah placed his hand over it and began to chant. The words were ancient. Not quite prayer, not quite curse, something in between. The wind stopped. The trees froze. Moonlight dimmed, swallowed by the mist. Then, from beneath the earth, a faint heartbeat began to thrum, slow at first, then faster. Elizabeth felt warmth under her feet. The soil trembled. Then with a silent jolt, the ground seemed to inhale. The leaves shuddered, cracks split through the earth. The mist spun into a perfect circle around them. Isaiah drew a blade across his palm. Blood dripped into the bowl. Seep guy. Earth remembers through blood, he said. It is her only language. Elizabeth did the same. Their blood mingled, seeping into the soil. The mist turned crimson. A tremor ran through her body. She seized Isaiah's hand. The markings on their skin began to spread, from arms to shoulders, from shoulders to their chests, burning, glowing, as if fire moved beneath their flesh. We are one, Isaiah said. No master, no slave, no man, no woman, only the earth. Then the ground split open. A wide crack tore through the circle. From it rose a dark vapor, swirling and alive, twisting, coiling around them. Within the smoke, whispers echoed, "We have returned. We were never forgotten." Elizabeth screamed, not in fear but in rapture. Blood flowed from her eyes instead of tears. She raised her hands toward the sky, and the moon turned blood red. Isaiah whispered, "This is the sacred hour, the earth is awake." From behind the trees, Malachi watched. Years later, he told what he saw. There was light all around them, blue and red. They began to fade, like smoke folding into the ground. Then the earth swallowed them, and where they stood, a deep pit opened. By dawn, the pit remained 20 feet wide, its depth unknown. Warm vapor still rose from it, and within the mist, 2 faint silhouettes could be seen, a man and a woman, standing hand in hand. After that night, not a single lamp was ever lit in Mount House again. Moisture crept up the walls, forming strange markings, circles and lines identical to the ones carved into Isaiah's flesh. Bessie was found half-conscious, her voice nearly gone. Before she died, she whispered, "She's gone into the earth, she won't return." But the earth breathes now. Dr. Merritt arrived days later to investigate. In his report, he wrote, "This is not a natural event. There is activity beneath the soil, possibly geothermal, though unlike any known phenomenon. When I approached the pit, I could feel the ground pulsing, a steady rhythm, unmistakably like a heartbeat. For weeks, red mist continued to rise from the fields. No rain fell, yet the ground remained wet. Villagers stopped coming. Near-dead animals that wandered close died within hours. Those few who dared to step into the fields returned, pale and trembling. They claimed they heard voices. A man's voice saying, 'We are free,' and a woman's replying, 'We are the earth.' Months later, the pit dried, but the markings on the ground stayed. Elizabeth's body was never found. Neither was Isaiah's. Whenever rain fell, tiny patterns would appear in the mud, circles, lines, and words in no known language. And if anyone stared too long, the symbols began to move, slowly, as though the soil itself were breathing. Even now, locals say if you visit on a September night, stand quietly in the moonlight at the edge of the old fields. You will hear a faint whisper rising from below. "I am Mount. I am alive." And then you will feel it, a heartbeat beneath your feet, slow but certain, the same pulse that woke that night and never went to sleep again. That was the night, the end of Mount Plantation, and the beginning of the earth's new living soul. The echo of the curse and the possible return of Isaiah. When the sun rose over Mount Plantation, silence ruled the land. No birds sang, no dogs barked. Instead of dew, a faint mist hovered over the blood-tinted soil. There was no sign of Elizabeth Mount or Isaiah Boone, only a circle burned deep into the ground, as if some giant hand had pressed a finger of fire into the earth. Villagers came, but none stayed long. The air was heavy, thick enough to choke. Those who ventured close felt nausea. Some burned with fever. Within days, the fields were deserted. And then, the stories began. 1847. The spread of the curse, Elizabeth's cousin, Edward Mount, tried to sell the plantation. He dismissed the rumors as madness, a woman's hysteria, a slave's superstition. He ordered the remaining tobacco harvested and sold it to traders in Savannah and Charleston, tobacco grown from those strange red-spotted leaves. Months later, city doctors began whispering of a new affliction, one that struck only those who smoked Mount Tobacco. It began with dreams, visions of distant shores, the sound of drums, words in an ancient tongue the dreamers could not understand. Then came sleepwalking, murmured prayers, and finally, their eyes changed color, turning to that same eerie shade of amber. Judge William Harrington of Savannah, whose wife had once warned Elizabeth on the day of the auction, was smoking Mount Tobacco in his drawing room when he suddenly stood up and spoke in a voice not his own. "I have returned. The land is mine." He collapsed moments later when he woke. His eyes glowed amber, and he never spoke English again. 1848, 1863, the silent years of Elizabeth. Mount Elizabeth was found alive, in the basement of the old house, eyes open, mind absent. The doctors called her a walking corpse. She was sent to the Georgia State Hospital, where she lived for 17 years, never speaking a word. Sometimes, nurses saw her tracing faint symbols on her arms, the same marks once carved into Isaiah's flesh. Dr. Merritt, who examined her in 1858, wrote in his notes, "This woman is not empty, she is inhabited. There is something behind her eyes, watching, waiting." She died in 1863, the day before her death. She wrote one final line in her diary, "He is not inside me, I am inside him." Flesh fades, but essence remains. 1870, 1890, the wandering preacher decades later. Cities along the eastern coast spoke of a strange preacher. He moved from Boston to Baltimore, from Charleston to New Orleans, delivering sermons on the true meaning of freedom. His skin was dark, his eyes golden, and across his body ran faint, glowing scars, symbols no one could decipher. He would tell his listeners, "We do not need heaven, the earth is our salvation. The soil demands blood, and in return it grants memory." One night, Baltimore police arrested him for inciting a crowd, but the next morning, the cell was empty. The door was locked, the key still inside. A guard swore he smelled tobacco smoke, and heard a soft whisper echo through the cell, "Freedom." Some historians later claimed it was Isaiah Boone, alive again, though in another form. 1922, Research and Ashes in 1922. The Georgia Historical Society attempted to study the plantation, but most records had vanished, lost to fire, humidity, or unknown circumstances. Only a few handwritten reports by Sheriff Harrington survived, along with a single jar of soil, black, oily, and faintly warm to the touch. That soil smelled faintly of burning tobacco. Within 3 days, the researchers fell ill. One man claimed lines appeared on his arms, thin, glowing scars in circular patterns. The investigation was halted. Mount Plantation was officially declared unfit land. 1967, the awakening ground in 1967. A construction company began building homes on the property. The first day went smoothly. On the second, workers unearthed a sealed clay jar. Inside was the same tar-black soil. Within 48 hours, 3 men developed strange markings on their forearms. One claimed he dreamed of a woman, in a white dress, her hair unbound, and behind her stood a tall shadow with golden eyes. He quit the next morning and fled the city. The project was abandoned. The land remains empty to this day. Locals still say the ground there breathes. 968. The final testimony the following year, a university student researching slavery camped overnight at the site. At dawn, he was found barefoot on the road. Delirious with fever, he kept repeating one sentence, "She's still looking for him." And the tobacco remembers what it was fed. Epilogue. The living earth time passed, but the name Mount Plantation never faded. Even now, after a heavy rain, a strange scent rises from the soil, a mix of tobacco, earth, and something older, something that stirs the breath but disturbs the soul. Locals say that on certain moonlit nights, a man and a woman can be seen walking the edge of the old fields. The woman carries a diary. The man, a handful of tobacco leaves, and when anyone approaches, they dissolve into the ground, as if the earth itself reclaims them. Even today, People whisper, some bargains come cheap, but their price is paid over centuries, and some knowledge once learned never lets the soul go free. Mount Plantation did not die. It merely sleeps, for what was planted there still breathes beneath the soil,